Darren Birch with FRN, and I'm here live at AUSA Expo in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Here with Dr. Kent Corso, who's not just a psychologist, but he's one of a small group of individuals that specialize in suicidology. So, did I just make up that word, or is that a real thing? We'll find out. Dr. Corso, again, welcome to AUSA.
Thanks, Darren.
Looking here, how exciting is this? Because you're prior military.
Air Force, which some people like you might
as
say,
an Army guy,
not a real.
It is a branch, it is. But in all sincerity, how exciting was it to see all these toys and hearing these shootings and tasers and things going on?
It's an incredible experience. Brings me back to times where we'd see static displays and other more dynamic types of demos. So very cool to be here.
Now, speaking of the military, you, again, Air Force, and in all sincerity, I want to thank you for your service because I kind of know why you joined the military. Can you talk about that?
So when I came into the military, this was right after 9/11. My cousin was in the South Tower when it went down. And so I was at a point in my life where I said, I'm either going to be a part of the solution or I'm going to be a bystander, which I would consider being part of the problem. So my wife and I both went on to active duty in the Air Force as psychologists.
Wow, thank you, and I mean that. Thank you for your service. A lot of times people say it, thank you for your service.
Thanks
Good
for the support.
That's amazing. So tell me about that transition from being in the military as a psychologist and then now in the private sector as a psychologist, and if you will, what gravitated to you towards that phrase I use, suicidology, and is that even a thing?
That's a real thing, believe it or not. We didn't just make it up. So when I went on active duty, there were more deaths by suicide than by enemy fire. And that was pretty sobering, and we had to get up to speed quite quickly to figure out how to stop that from happening. Now, I was also fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time, have some good leaders, be at a good base, where I could conduct research and really get some buy-in from senior leaders to really make a difference. Suicide prevention doesn't work if you don't have buy-in from senior stakeholders. So if you're talking about within the military, the commanders have to buy in, the Secretary of the Air Force, Navy, Army, they have to buy in. When we're looking in the civilian sector, you also need leaders, mayors, county executives, governors, you name it. You need senior leaders buying in because they can not only help you gain the funding to do accurate prevention, but they can make sure that all the right stakeholders are at the table. So this is a community to prevent suicide.
You know, when you talk about suicide numbers, and sadly I know this one stat and it's stuck in my head, and because it connects with 9/11. The stat is from 9/11-2001 to 9/11-2021. There was 30,177 suicides compared to during that same time period, 20 years, those killed in action, 7,057. That's staggering. One is the size of a small city, Gloucester, Massachusetts. Tell us about what we need to do, and are we now, because of technology, because of people like yourself, because of shows like this talking about it, are we creating a curve, and is this numbers going down?
Good question. So the numbers are not going down. Sadly, we're not bending the curve. Now, it is true that military suicides in some years outpace civilian suicides. In other years, they're lower than civilian suicides. Remember that the military is a group of people who are younger, and they don't really represent the general population in America.
Good point. Yeah.
So you do see some years where it's higher and some where it's lower. One of the things we started doing years ago was trying to destigmatize, and we still have more work to do. We've come a long way, but we've still got to do more. People are still scared to seek help. They think that if they seek help, their career is over, so that's a deterrent. One of the things we're trying to do more and more of, both in the military world, in the civilian world, in law enforcement communities, is reducing barriers to help seeking. Part of the solution is also getting people to ask the question, are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of ending your life? It's a really awkward question to ask people if you either don't know them very well or you're not very comfortable knowing other people's personal stuff.
And that kind of goes back to the buy-in with leadership in terms of making your staff, your troops, truly believe and trust it's okay not to be okay and be able to come forward.
Right. I love that phrase you use. It's okay to not be okay, right? And that's not only when the suicide numbers are high, we've got to learn how to maintain it, exactly, which means what are we doing upstream before they get high to create circumstances that make it safe to seek help and safe to accept, you know what, I'm not doing well and I need to go get some help.
And talking about people that aren't doing well, and again, maybe I'm simplifying this, please correct me, but I think of PTSI or PTSD. When I think of PTSI, injury opposed to this disorder, I think of a profession like the military, like police, where we see something part of our profession, having been in a shooting 3 times, that type of post-traumatic stress, opposed to life troubles like hurricane,
catastrophe,
a divorce, death,
right.
In a family. Can you talk about that? Am I oversimplifying it, or am I way out?
No, I think you raise a good point, and there are many people who see it this way. They feel like if your job puts you in harm's way on a regular basis and you're exposed to potentially traumatic things all the time, why would we call that a disorder?
Yeah,
that's just a part of the job. Whereas someone who is in a motor vehicle accident, a hurricane, another natural disaster, a sexual assault, which are the top causes of PTSD in our country, motor vehicle accidents are actually number 1. That's such a unique circumstance. It's a crisis, it's a catastrophe. It's not something you're involved in every day as a part of your service or part of your occupation.
And as far as getting the buy-in from the community, we talked about the leadership, that totally makes sense. As far as the buy-in in the community, I would think it would be shows like this. And the reason I bring that up is I was literally giddy to talk with you about this topic, because as a cop for 30 years, it was all about saving lives. Now I'm retired, you can't turn off like a light switch. You still want to help. How important is it for us to have shows like this and have discussions like this, even though it may be difficult to hear?
There's no bones about it. These conversations are critical. You can't reduce suicides if you're not willing to have a direct, frank, sometimes uncomfortable conversation. It's not a comfortable topic. The solutions and conversations are not going to be comfortable. There's never been a time in history of America, any other developed country in the free world, where we've reduced the suicide rates even by 20% and then sustained those rates. And when we look at why, one of the biggest reasons is people don't talk about it. They're either not willing to ask those difficult questions, are you thinking of killing yourself, are you thinking of ending your life? Or they're not willing to tolerate a difficult discussion about it. We've got to raise awareness. These conversations are critical.
Yeah, I look at it as being the back end, if you will, of a problem. And the front end, there's nothing we can change about the traumas of life or the traumas of war or the traumas of the job as a police officer. They're there. They're going to be there. So if we can't change that factor, we can't change the human spirit, because as humans, there are certain things we shouldn't see. But as police officers, in the fog of war, we see these things and the trauma. Can you talk about a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It is a human thing to try to be resilient. Humans are growth oriented.
As shots are
being fired over your shoulder and over mine. That's right. And we're so resilient, but there's also this belief system that we should be invincible. And law enforcement, military have this mentality, and it's not entirely helpful. So they'll go through difficult situation after difficult situation, and they'll believe that they can just continue to tolerate everything. And that's not how the human works. We are like sponges. We can absorb a lot of hardship, a lot of difficult things, but if we don't squeeze the sponge out and make room for further hardship, further experience, it just starts to overflow and ooze out. Whether that comes out as trauma symptoms, whether that comes out as drinking too much alcohol, or other unhealthy habits, that's what happens when you can't really tolerate much more, but you refuse to sort of get the help we need to squeeze out the sponge is the best way I can describe it, Darren.
A simple and please, say, Darren, that's stupid. I always look at it as a tea kettle, old-fashioned tea kettle on the stove, and it's boiling over, it becomes steam, and eventually it could explode. You need to vent it. And
right.
Kind of like talking needs to vent. To that point, for 911, we've had 911, everyone knows 911. There's a lot, I've had a story, and I'm just going to share real quick. We had it on FRN, it was Matt Griffin. It was called Journey to Midnight. And he decided he was going to be very pragmatic and clinical about it. He was going to kill himself. He was, he reached that level where he was done. And he said, I'm going to do it on this date at midnight. for whatever reason, at some point he thought, you know what, I got chills. At some point, I'm going to call a helpline. And he almost wanting to save himself, not almost, but when he got to the helpline, it was 60 minutes away. It was some extended distance, and they couldn't help him right then. That was a problem. Now, thankfully, someone called him out of the blue. Someone called him.
Wow.
Beautiful story. He's live today to talk about it. There's now a new hotline. Can you talk about that and how important that is?
For years, we've had an 800 number for mental health crises and suicide crises. Now we've moved to 988. It's sort of like 911, but it's 988. And it's surprising that for 10 years, the whole country has been trying to move to this one number. We've finally done it as of July of this year, and it just makes things easier. It still taps into the local, state, or territory where you live. There's even an option for veterans to dial 1, right?
Love it.
Unlike an 800 number, you can text it as well. So it just makes it simpler. Most people have cell phones these days, so you're either texting or calling 988. 911 will always work, and the 800 number that previously worked will still stay online for a while through the transition.
So you talked about the leadership, getting the buy-in. We've talked about communicating this to the community and as well as to ourselves. You know, it's okay not to be okay. As far as training, teaching people these things, what kind of training is out there? Do you do any kind of training?
Absolutely. So I do a training called PROSPER, the Proactive Reduction of Suicide in Populations via Evidence-Based Research. We've been doing one-size-fits-all suicide prevention training for too long, and it's not surprising that it's not working. The top 5 states that have the highest suicide rates every year, Alaska, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, their culture is not the same as, let's say, Florida, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Louisiana. So we've got to stop doing one-size-fits-all. That's part of what PROSPER helps teach physicians, nurses, mental health professionals, as well as just citizens at large. How do we be a part of the solution in the most effective way?
In closing, if there was a message that you could put out someone that's, let's say, watching this show, that is hurting to a point where they're not just thinking about it, considering it, they're really, truly going to do it, what would you say to that person? And then follow up that with what would you say to that person's family, because many times it's the family members that see the red flags.
So I think when people are thinking of killing themselves, what we know is they don't truly want to die. They just don't want to live with all their pain.
You don't want to die.
Right. They don't really want to die. They just don't want to live with their pain and can't see a way around it. So my message to people who are thinking of killing themselves is, if this is truly the choice you want to make, at least wait till tomorrow. Don't make it today. If it's really what's right for you, I won't stand in your way, but let's try waiting till tomorrow and thinking about it again and giving it a shot to think numerous times. Even when we look at people who've attempted suicide and survived, the vast majority will never attempt again. They realize that they made the wrong decision. And so then when you ask about what do we say to families, it's amazing how many cues family members might miss. So just listen closely. If you hear someone say something like, I think I'm going to check out, or something like, I think I'm going to go drink my dinner, these are all things that are not healthy statements. So even small gestures of kindness and love within a family can help someone delay the attempt they've already decided to make.
I have to follow up with someone that is out there. I've just noticed in my 30 years, alcohol seemed to be hand in hand with these decisions. And so to your point, talking about just wait a day, you're sobering that day. Is there any truth to that?
Alcohol is absolutely an accelerator for suicidal behaviors and attempts, without a doubt.
I love that. I cannot thank you enough for everything you're doing, not just being here and talking to us, but seriously, everything you're doing and have done. Again, for that training, is there a website or somewhere they can go to find more information about that and you?
Sure. You can find it on my website, ncrbehavioralhealth.com.
I cannot thank you enough for joining us here on AUSA, this interview, and talking about so many important things that I truly believe can save lives. And again, not just thank you for being here, but thank you for everything you do. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the opportunity, Darren. Thanks.
And thank you for joining us for this interview with Dr. Kent Corso. There are other interviews here at, again, live at AUSA Expo Take a look on FRN for these and other shows.